Cowboy rescued Apache beneath falling rocks, and their return during harvest brought an omen. Hello everyone, before we begin today's story, I have a small favor to ask. Please hit subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you never miss our channel's new videos. It's quick, free, and the best way to support us in bringing you more dramatic stories. Your support means the world to us. Where are you watching from? Drop your city or country in the comments below. Thank you very much. Now, let's get back to the story. Jack Thompson had always been a man of the land. A cowboy who lived by the rhythm of the seasons, his days spent tending to cattle and repairing fences under the endless sky of the western plains. His ranch, isolated on the edge of the rugged mountains, was the kind of place most people avoided, a quiet, forgotten corner of the world where the land and the wind spoke louder than any human voice. Jack liked it that way. It kept him away from the noise of society and its troubles. The only sounds he cared about were the calls of the birds and the low murmur of the cattle. It was a hard life, but it was a life he had chosen. One morning, while Jack was out near the cliffs, chopping wood for the coming winter, a sudden rumble shook the ground beneath him. It wasn't thunder, though the sky was clear. The earth trembled, and rocks tumbled down from the cliffs above, sending a cascade of boulders down into the ravine below. Jack's heart raced as he turned to see a small figure struggling beneath the falling rocks. A young woman, her dark hair tangled with the earth, was trapped under a pile of stones. Without a second thought, Jack dropped his axe and ran toward her, his boots pounding the rocky ground. He reached her just in time, lifting the heavy stones with all his strength, his muscles straining with the effort. The woman's eyes were wide with fear, but there was something else in them, a recognition, as if she had known Jack before. She gasped for air as Jack freed her from the weight of the rocks, pulling her into his arms. She was small, her body trembling from the shock, but her grip on his arm was surprisingly strong. "Thank you," she whispered, her voice hoarse. "I thought I was going to die." Jack nodded, his mind racing. He had never seen this woman before, but there was something familiar about her. She looked like one of the Apache, but he had no time to ask questions. "We need to get you to safety," Jack said, lifting her carefully and leading her back to his cabin. The woman, though weak, followed him without protest. As they walked, Jack couldn't shake the feeling that there was something important about this encounter, something that would change his life in ways he couldn't yet understand. He helped her inside, offering her water and food as she rested by the fire. Her name, she told him, was Lila. She was from a nearby Apache tribe, and she had been traveling when the landslide struck. Jack felt a strange pull in his chest as she spoke, but he didn't know why. He had never been one to meddle in the affairs of others, especially not with the Apache, whose people had a long history of tension with the settlers. Yet, here he was, alone with this woman in his cabin, and for reasons he couldn't explain, he couldn't bring himself to send her away. The next few days passed in a blur as Jack helped Lila recover. She seemed to be waiting for something, though Jack couldn't figure out what. Every now and then, she would stare out the window toward the mountains, her expression distant, as if she were expecting something, or someone. Jack couldn't help but feel that her presence here was more than just a coincidence. The night before she left, Lila turned to Jack and spoke quietly. "You saved my life, Cowboy," she said. "And that will not go forgotten. But there is something you need to know." Jack raised an eyebrow. "What do you mean?" Lila hesitated, then glanced out toward the mountains. "My people, they have their ways of showing gratitude. And when I return during the harvest, there will be a sign. A sign for you." Jack didn't fully understand what she meant, but the words lingered in his mind long after she had left. He thought of her often in the weeks that followed, but as the harvest season drew closer, he tried to push the thoughts from his mind. The land was calling him back to work, and Jack was determined not to get lost in his own musings. What he didn't know, though, was that Lila's return would bring something unexpected, and the omen she had spoken of would soon become clear. As the days grew shorter and the air crisper, Jack Thompson found himself working harder than ever. The harvest season was always a busy time, but this year, there was an unfamiliar tension in the air. Jack couldn't quite shake the memory of Lila's words, the promise she had made before leaving his cabin. When I return during the harvest, there will be a sign. He didn't know why, but he kept finding his gaze drifting toward the distant mountains, wondering if she was out there, watching from the shadows. It was late one afternoon when Jack first noticed the riders. At first, they were just a small dot on the horizon, barely visible through the dust kicked up by their horses. Jack wasn't sure if they were travelers passing through or something more. As they drew closer, the familiar sight of Apache warriors became unmistakable. His heart skipped a beat as he recognized the leader, Lila, riding at the front with a calm yet commanding presence. Her face was strong, but there was something else in her eyes, something he couldn't quite place. The warriors moved in perfect formation, their horses steady and sure, as if they had been practicing this ride for years. Jack stood frozen in place, unsure of what to do. He had promised to help her, but now that she had returned, he was filled with uncertainty. The land had always been his world, and the Apache were a people he knew little of. Yet there was something about Lila that had changed everything for him. She had shown him a different side of the world, one filled with honor, respect, and an unexpected bond. As the warriors approached, Jack swallowed hard, wiping his brow with the back of his hand. His farm, once quiet and empty, now seemed too small to hold all the weight of what was happening. Lila's group dismounted in perfect unison, their movements almost choreographed. Lila stepped forward, her eyes locking with Jack's from across the field. The others remained in the background, their faces stoic, yet there was a quiet energy in the air. "You kept your promise," Lila said, her voice carrying the weight of years. "You saved me when I needed it most." Jack nodded, unsure of what else to say. Lila's words still hung in the air, heavy with meaning. He had saved her, but in some way, she had saved him too. She had opened his eyes to a world he had never fully understood. Jack had always lived his life in solitude, keeping to himself and avoiding the complexities of the outside world. But now, with Lila standing before him, everything seemed different. The moment was interrupted by a soft noise from one of the warriors, who had approached Jack's barn. It was then that Jack realized the true nature of their visit. The warriors weren't here just to thank him. They had come for something else, something far greater than gratitude. Lila turned to the warrior and nodded, signaling him to bring something forward. With careful hands, the warrior held out a small, intricately carved wooden box. Jack's heart raced as he took the box in his hands. It was warm, almost as if it had been waiting for him. Lila's eyes met his once more, her gaze steady but filled with an unspoken understanding. "This is for you," she said softly. "A gift from my people. It is a symbol of what you have done for me, and what you've done for us all." Jack opened the box slowly, revealing a beautifully crafted pendant, its silver glinting in the dying light of the day. The pendant was unlike anything he had ever seen. It was adorned with symbols he didn't recognize, but the meaning was clear. This was not just a gift. It was a token of something far greater, a bond between two people from different worlds. "The harvest is coming," Lila continued. "And with it, an omen. One that will change the fate of this land." Jack didn't fully understand what she meant, but as he looked down at the pendant, he felt a sense of weight settle on his chest. The omen was here, and it was only the beginning. Lila's presence, the warriors at her side, and the gift she had given him, it all felt like a turning point, one that Jack had no choice but to face. The land had always been his, but now, it seemed that something greater was at stake. Something he couldn't ignore. As the sun dipped below the horizon, casting long shadows across the field, Jack knew that his life was about to change in ways he couldn't yet imagine. The omen had arrived, and it was tied to Lila, to the Apache, and to the land he had spent his life tending. The future was uncertain, but one thing was clear: he was no longer alone. And whatever came next, he would face it with the strength he had found in the most unexpected of places. The days stretched on as Jack Thompson worked the land, feeling the weight of Lila's gift pressing on him. It was strange to think that something so small could have such an impact, but the pendant, with its mysterious symbols, was no longer just a token of gratitude. It was a reminder that the Apache had come into his life in a way he hadn't expected. The harvest was near, and so was the Omen Lila had spoken of. As he worked, Jack couldn't shake the feeling that the world around him was shifting. The air felt different, as though the winds were whispering of changes to come. He had always been a man of the land, content to toil in the quiet solitude of his ranch. But now, the land felt more alive, more connected to something larger than himself. One afternoon, as Jack was tending to the last of the fields, he heard the distant rumble of thunder. The storm was coming, fast and fierce, just like the Omen Lila had hinted at. It was the kind of storm that could change everything, bringing both destruction and renewal. Jack paused in his work, wiping the sweat from his brow, and gazed toward the mountains. He could see the dark clouds gathering on the horizon, swirling ominously, but they weren't the only thing on his mind. As the storm neared, so did Lila and her warriors. He had heard them long before he saw them, first the soft thud of hooves, then the distant sound of voices rising in the wind. By the time they reached his ranch, the sky had turned dark, the first flashes of lightning splitting the clouds. Jack stood at the edge of his porch, watching them approach. The warriors were like shadows in the storm, their faces obscured by the swirling dust and rain. Lila rode at the front, her eyes fixed on Jack as she led her people forward. They had come as promised, but there was something different about their arrival. The air was thick with anticipation, and Jack could feel the weight of their presence before they even spoke. Lila's gaze never wavered as she dismounted, her horse stomping in the wet earth. She walked toward Jack, her steps purposeful and steady, the storm now fully upon them. "It is time," she said simply, her voice carrying the strength of someone who had seen much and understood more. Jack nodded, though the storm in his mind raged louder than the one in the sky. "Time for what?" he asked, his voice barely audible over the roar of the wind. "Time for the omen to be fulfilled," Lila replied. She motioned to her warriors, who had begun to form a circle around the ranch, their faces stoic but their presence undeniable. The storm seemed to amplify the tension in the air, the very earth vibrating with the force of nature and fate itself. Jack stood still, feeling the cool rain begin to soak through his shirt, yet he couldn't tear his eyes away from Lila. She had returned, not just to fulfill her promise, but to bring about a change that would affect them both. The omen wasn't just a sign for Jack, it was a sign for all of them. "The harvest is near," Lila continued, her voice softening. "But with it, a choice will come. A choice that will change everything." Jack swallowed hard, unsure of what she meant. But before he could ask further, Lila placed the pendant in his hand once more, her fingers brushing his. The gesture was subtle but carried more weight than any spoken word. It was as if the pendant had become a bridge between them, a symbol of the bond that had formed in such an unexpected way. The warriors stood in silence as the storm raged on around them, the lightning flashing in the distance, casting long shadows over the land. It was as if the world itself was holding its breath, waiting for what would come next. Jack looked down at the pendant in his hand, the weight of its meaning sinking in deeper than ever before. The storm was here, the omen was real, and there was no turning back now. Whatever choice he had to make, it would come soon, whether he was ready or not. The storm continued to rage, but Jack Thompson stood still, his gaze fixed on Lila and the warriors that surrounded his land. The air was thick with tension, and the sound of the wind howling through the trees seemed to mirror the turmoil in his chest. He had no idea what choice Lila was speaking of, but he knew it was something he couldn't ignore. His entire life had led him to this moment, and now, with the omen hanging over them like a storm cloud, he was faced with a decision that would shape the future. Lila turned to face him, her expression unreadable, yet there was a softness in her eyes that he hadn't seen before. She spoke again, her voice calm despite the chaos around them. "The land has always been a place of power," she said, her gaze sweeping across the fields that Jack had worked so hard to cultivate. "But it is not the land alone that holds power, it is the people who understand its rhythms, its stories, its past. You have shown that you understand this, Jack. You saved my life, and now the time has come for the land to choose. Jack's brow furrowed. Choose? He repeated, the word heavy on his tongue. What do you mean by that? Lila's eyes flickered to the sky, where the first cracks of dawn were beginning to break through the storm clouds. The harvest brings more than just crops, she said quietly. It brings a new beginning. But it also brings an end. An end to the way things have been. Jack felt a chill run down his spine. He had heard stories of the Apache traditions, of their connection to the land, but he had never fully understood them. Now, it seemed that he was about to be drawn into something much larger than he had ever imagined. As the storm began to subside, the warriors moved with purpose, their steps deliberate as they set up a circle around Jack's ranch. Lila, standing in the center, motioned for him to join her. Jack hesitated for a moment, but something in her eyes told him that this was a moment he couldn't pass up. He stepped forward, the rain now a gentle mist against his skin, and took his place beside her. The Omen is not just for me, Lila said, her voice soft but firm. It is for us both. The bond that has formed between us is not just one of gratitude. It is one of fate. The land has chosen you, Jack, just as it chose me. We are connected, and together, we must make the choice. Jack swallowed, the weight of her words sinking in. He had never thought of himself as part of something larger, something that could affect the fate of an entire people. But now, standing beside Lila, he could feel the connection between them, as if the land itself was pulling them together. What do I have to do? He asked, his voice steady despite the uncertainty that gripped him. Lila smiled, the first real smile Jack had seen from her, and it was a smile that held both strength and warmth. You will know when the time comes, she said. The harvest will bring the sign. And when it does, you must be ready to act. The land will not wait for you forever. The words hung in the air, heavy with meaning, as the warriors began to chant in their native tongue. The sound was rhythmic, almost hypnotic, and it seemed to draw Jack in, as if the very earth beneath his feet was alive with energy. He closed his eyes for a moment, allowing the rhythm to wash over him, and when he opened them again, he saw something he hadn't expected. The sun had broken through the clouds, casting a golden light over the fields, and in the distance, he could see the first signs of the harvest, tall stalks of wheat swaying in the breeze, ready to be gathered. But there was more than just the harvest. There was something in the air, a feeling of anticipation, as if the land itself was waiting for something to happen. Jack felt his heart race as he realized that the omen was not just a warning, it was a call to action. He had a role to play in whatever was to come, and he wasn't sure if he was ready for it. But as he looked at Lila, standing beside him, he knew that he wasn't alone. Together they would face whatever the land had in store for them. And when the harvest came, they would be ready. The wind shifted, carrying the scent of rain and earth, and Jack knew that the time had come. He had to make the choice, stay in the comfort of his ranch, or step into the unknown, guided by the omen, the land, and the bond he had formed with Lila. The future was uncertain, but one thing was clear, whatever happened next, it would change everything. As the days passed, Jack Thompson couldn't shake the feeling that everything was coming to a head. The harvest was nearing, and with it, the omen Lila had spoken of. Jack had always trusted the rhythms of the land, but now, there was a new rhythm, one that echoed with uncertainty. The air was thick with anticipation, as though the very earth beneath his feet was waiting for something to happen. Every step Jack took on his ranch seemed to reverberate with the weight of what was coming, but he couldn't tell exactly what it was. The bond between him and Lila had grown stronger, but still, the future remained unclear. Lila had returned to the mountains with her warriors, but she promised she would be back. Her last words echoed in his mind. The harvest will bring the sign. And when it does, you must be ready to act. As the morning sun rose on the day the harvest was to begin, Jack was out in the fields, his hands moving mechanically as he worked. He could feel the change in the air, though he couldn't place it. It was as if the winds themselves were speaking to him, carrying with them whispers of something far larger than his small world. Jack paused for a moment, wiping the sweat from his brow, and glanced up at the sky. The clouds had cleared, and the sun shone brightly, casting golden light over the land. But in that light, something was different. There, on the horizon, Jack saw the familiar silhouette of Lila, riding alone. She was moving toward him with a determined pace, her horse's hooves kicking up dust as she approached. Jack's heart skipped a beat. This was it. This was the moment she had warned him about. He set aside his tools and stood still, waiting for her to reach him. When Lila finally arrived, she dismounted gracefully, her eyes meeting Jack's with an intensity that made his chest tighten. "It's time," she said simply, her voice carrying the weight of 1,000 unspoken words. Jack nodded, unable to speak at first. He had known this moment would come, but now that it was here, he felt both exhilarated and fearful. "What do we do now?" he asked, his voice steady but low. Lila reached into her pouch and pulled out a small, weathered scroll. She held it out to Jack, who took it in his hands. The scroll was old, the paper yellowed with age, but the symbols written on it were unmistakable. It was the language of the Apache, and it carried with it a power that Jack could feel in his bones. "This is the final piece," Lila said, her voice soft but firm. "The Omen has come, and now the land will decide what happens next. You and I, Jack, are tied to this land. We must choose how we move forward." Jack unrolled the scroll, his eyes scanning the symbols. As he read, a strange sense of clarity washed over him. The words were simple yet profound. They spoke of unity, of sacrifice, and of the land's power to heal or destroy. He felt the weight of his ancestors' voices on the wind, urging him to understand. The harvest was not just about gathering crops. It was about gathering the fruits of a decision, one that would shape the future for both the Apache and the settlers. "The land will choose," Lila continued. "And so will we." Jack looked up at her, his heart racing. He had never felt more connected to the earth beneath him than in this moment. The ground, the sky, the wind, they were all part of this decision, part of the Omen. Together, they would decide what would come next. Lila's eyes softened as she studied him. "This is the moment, Jack. The choice is yours, but remember, whatever decision we make will affect everyone." Jack took a deep breath, his hand still holding the scroll. The weight of the moment pressed down on him, but he knew, deep in his heart, that there was only one way forward. "Let's do this," he said finally, his voice steady with resolve. "We'll face whatever comes next, together." Lila smiled, a glint of pride in her eyes. As the first rays of the harvest sun shone down on the land, Jack and Lila stood side by side, ready to face the Omen, ready to make their choice. The land had already begun to shift beneath their feet, and the winds were beginning to stir. Jack felt the ground tremble slightly, as if the earth itself was awakening to the decision that was about to be made. It was time to see what the harvest would bring, and what role they would play in the story of the land. As the days wore on, Jack Thompson stood at the edge of his land, watching the harvest unfold before him. The earth had begun to give, the crops ripening under the golden sun, but there was something more in the air, something heavier than just the promise of a bountiful season. Lila's words lingered in his mind like the scent of rain on dry soil. "The choice is yours, Jack. And whatever decision we make will affect everyone." Jack had always trusted in the rhythms of nature, but this was different. There was a deeper meaning to the harvest, one that went beyond the simple act of collecting crops. The land was telling him something he couldn't fully understand yet. It was as if every blade of grass, every gust of wind, and every bird that flew overhead was waiting for him to make a choice. That evening, as the sun dipped low, Jack found himself standing in the same spot where Lila had arrived just days before. The warriors had gone back to their camp, leaving Jack alone with his thoughts. He felt the weight of the earth beneath his boots, the weight of the decision that was about to come. He had always thought of himself as a man who made his own fate. But now, it seemed that fate had a way of finding him, no matter how hard he tried to avoid it. The wind began to pick up, and Jack looked toward the mountains, where dark clouds had started to gather again. It was a reminder of the omen Lila had spoken of. Something was coming, and it would change everything. The harvest was not just about the crops. It was about the future of the land and the people who lived on it. Jack didn't know what he was meant to do, but he knew he couldn't ignore the signs any longer. As the first stars began to twinkle in the darkening sky, Lila returned, her silhouette appearing from the shadows of the trees. She rode alone this time, her horse moving at a steady pace, the soft rhythm of its hooves matching the beat of Jack's racing heart. She stopped just short of where Jack stood, and for a moment, they simply stared at one another. "The time has come," Lila said softly, her voice carrying the weight of the words. Jack swallowed hard. "What do we do now?" Lila dismounted gracefully, her eyes never leaving his. "Now we wait for the sign. The land will show us the way. But we must be ready." Jack nodded, feeling the tension in the air tighten. The wind seemed to grow stronger, swirling around them as if it too were preparing for something. "I've never been good at waiting," Jack said, his voice low. "You've waited your whole life for this," Lila replied, her words calm but filled with an underlying certainty. Jack glanced around the land, taking in the sight of the crops swaying gently in the breeze. It was a beautiful sight, one that reminded him of why he had chosen this life in the first place. But it wasn't enough. There was something deeper calling to him. "What is it we're waiting for?" Jack asked, his voice tinged with frustration. "The harvest," Lila said simply. "But it is more than just the crops. It is the turning point, Jack. It is the moment when the land will decide. And we must be ready to make our choice." The silence between them stretched out, filled with the weight of unspoken words. Jack felt his chest tighten as the realization hit him. This was it. The choice he had been dreading, the choice he had been waiting for, had arrived. And he was no longer alone in making it. He had Lila by his side, and together, they would face whatever came next. The wind picked up again, carrying with it the scent of rain, and for a brief moment, Jack thought he could hear the land itself whispering to him. The signs were everywhere, if only he could understand them. As the stars shone brighter in the night sky, Jack knew that whatever happened next, it would be a decision that would affect not just his land, but everything he had come to know. The Omen had arrived. And now, Jack and Lila would have to face it together. The night was thick with anticipation as Jack and Lila stood together on the land that had brought them together. The wind had finally settled, and the air seemed to hold its breath, as if waiting for the next moment to unfold. The harvest was nearly complete, but something about this evening felt different, as though the land itself was holding its secrets close. Jack glanced over at Lila, who stood with her face lifted toward the sky, her eyes closed as if she could feel something he could not. She had told him the time would come when they would face the Omen together, and now, it seemed the moment had arrived. "Do you feel it?" Jack asked, his voice soft, almost hesitant. Lila's eyes opened slowly, and she turned to him with a look that made his chest tighten. "I do," she said, her voice steady and filled with certainty. "The land is calling, Jack. The harvest is the turning point, but it's not just about the crops. It's about what comes next." Jack swallowed, his hands restless at his sides. He had always thought he understood the land, its rhythms, its quiet power. But now, standing with Lila, he realized there was so much more to it than he had ever imagined. "What happens next?" he asked, his voice barely above a whisper. Lila took a step closer, her presence grounding him as the air seemed to hum with energy. "No," she said. "We must make the choice. The Omen is the land's way of showing us the path. But we have to decide which way to go." Jack's heart raced as the weight of her words settled over him. He had been waiting for something to happen, but now that it was here, he wasn't sure if he was ready to face it. "What choice do we make?" Jack asked, his voice tight. Lila met his gaze with unwavering confidence. "The choice of unity or division," she said. "The choice of the past or the future. The land can only move forward if we move together." Jack's mind raced, trying to grasp the enormity of what Lila was saying. The land had always been divided, between the settlers and the Apache, between their ways and the world they had built. Could they truly come together to shape the future? Could he, a cowboy, and she, an Apache woman, create a new path forward? The ground beneath his feet seemed to shift as the wind picked up again, swirling around them. Jack felt the earth tremble slightly, as though it was urging him to make his decision. The harvest had brought its fruits, but it was now clear that it was not just about the crops. It was about something deeper, something more profound. Lila stepped back slightly, her eyes never leaving Jack's. "The land will guide us," she said. "But we must listen. The choice is yours, Jack. We can either fight to keep things the way they've always been, or we can work together to build something new." Jack stood still for a moment, feeling the weight of her words, feeling the pull of the land beneath him. This was the moment that would shape everything. The choice wasn't just his, it was theirs. Together, they could decide what the future would hold. "I'm ready," Jack said finally, his voice steady and full of resolve. "Let's make this choice together." Lila smiled, the pride in her eyes unmistakable. As the first stars began to twinkle in the sky, Jack and Lila stood side by side, ready to face whatever came next. The Omen had arrived, but it wasn't just a warning, it was a call to action. Together, they would answer that call, not as enemies or strangers, but as partners, united by the land they both called home. The harvest had come and gone, and now, it was time to decide what to do with the fruits of their labor. The land was waiting, and so were they. The days that followed were filled with uncertainty, but Jack Thompson and Lila remained steady, united in their purpose. Together, they had made their decision, the choice to move forward, to unite the land and its people, and to create something new. The weight of the decision still lingered in the air, but there was a quiet confidence in their hearts as they prepared for what was to come. The harvest had been bountiful, but it wasn't just the crops that had flourished. The connection between Jack and Lila, once uncertain, had now solidified into something stronger than either of them had expected. Their bond, forged by shared struggle and respect for the land, had given them the strength to face what lay ahead. As the sun rose higher in the sky, casting long shadows over the fields, Jack stood with Lila at the edge of the land, looking out over the expanse they had both worked so hard to cultivate. The harvest was complete, but the real work had only just begun. "This is just the beginning," Lila said softly, her voice filled with quiet determination. Jack nodded, feeling the weight of her words. "I know," he said, his gaze fixed on the horizon. The land stretched out before them, vast and full of potential, but there was something else there too, a sense of history, of legacy, that seemed to hum in the air. "We've made a choice," Jack said, turning to Lila. "Now we have to see it through." Lila's eyes softened as she looked at him. "We will," she said, her voice steady. "Together." As they stood there, the wind began to shift, carrying with it the scent of rain. Jack glanced up at the sky, noticing the clouds gathering once again, dark and heavy with the promise of another storm. It was as if the land itself was responding to their decision, to their commitment to face the future together. The storm was coming, but Jack didn't feel fear. He felt a sense of resolve, of certainty that no matter what the land or the future threw at them, they would face it as one. "The Omen has passed," Lila said quietly, her gaze drifting toward the mountains. "But the work is not done. We must continue to listen to the land, to honor its rhythms, and to build something that will last." Jack looked at her, a new sense of purpose rising within him. "We will," he said, his voice strong. "We will make it last." The storm rolled in, dark clouds covering the sky, but as the first drops of rain began to fall, Jack and Lila remained standing together, their hearts full of the promise they had made. The land was alive, and so were they. They had chosen the future, and with it, they had chosen each other. No matter what came next, they would face it together, side by side. The storm had arrived, but so had a new beginning. Jack could feel the earth beneath him, the connection between him and the land, between him and Lila, growing stronger with every passing moment. The harvest was over, but the real journey was just beginning. As the storm finally passed, the morning light broke through the clouds, casting a soft glow over the land. Jack Thompson stood with Lila, his boots sinking slightly into the damp earth as he took in the quiet after the storm. The fields around them seemed to breathe a sigh of relief, the crops now watered, the land nourished. But Jack knew the work was far from over. The future they had chosen was only just beginning to unfold. The promise they had made to one another, to unite the land and its people, was one that would take time, effort, and unwavering commitment. Yet, in this moment, standing side by side with Lila, Jack felt a peace he had never known before. "We've chosen the path," Lila said softly, her voice steady. Jack nodded, his gaze still fixed on the horizon. The wind had calmed, and the world seemed to stretch out before them, endless and full of possibility. "And now we walk it," Jack replied. He could feel the weight of their decision, but also the hope that it carried with it. "Together," Lila added, her hand brushing against his, a simple gesture that spoke volumes. They didn't need words to understand what lay ahead. The bond they shared, forged through their respect for the land and each other, was enough to face whatever challenges would come. As they stood there, the sun climbing higher in the sky, Jack felt the first stirrings of a new chapter in his life. He had spent years on this land, alone, working the soil, tending the cattle, and never truly understanding the deeper connection that the earth held. But now, with Lila by his side, he realized that the land was more than just something to farm. It was something to protect, something to nurture. Lila had shown him that. And now, he would help her show the world. The warriors had left for the time being, but their presence still lingered in the air, like the last traces of the storm. Jack knew that they would return, as would the others who had been touched by the promise of unity. The work would not be easy, but it was necessary. Jack turned to Lila, his heart filled with a quiet determination. "We'll need help," he said, his voice steady, but his words carrying the weight of what was to come. "The land can only provide so much. But we can't do this alone." Lila's gaze met his, and for a moment, they both understood what he meant. The road ahead would require more than just their efforts. It would require the cooperation of those who had long been divided. It would require the settlers and the Apache to come together, to share the land and its resources, and to learn from one another. It would take patience, trust, and respect. But Jack believed it could be done. And as he looked at Lila, he knew that they were ready to take the first steps. "We'll find a way," Lila said, her voice filled with the same resolve. "We'll make it work." The wind shifted again, a gentle breeze rustling the leaves in the trees. Jack closed his eyes for a moment, feeling the cool air on his face, the scent of fresh earth filling his lungs. He knew that the challenges they would face in the coming months and years would test them in ways they couldn't yet imagine. But he also knew that they had something stronger than any obstacle, each other. And that, he believed, would be enough to see them through. Together they would walk the path they had chosen, side by side, united by the land that had brought them together. The future was uncertain, but for the first time in a long while, Jack felt ready to face it, with Lila by his side and the land beneath his feet.